Good evening and thanks for joining us for this edition of Resource PNG. Despite PNG's resource boom, the country's resource sector has been reviewed as not very socially inclusive. Tonight we discuss with the Minister for Community Development, Youth and Religion, Lujaya Tony, how the government can work with development partners to close that gap. Also on the show, we speak to Aaron Batten, Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank, ADB, and Bill Muntz of NKW Holdings.
Good evening, viewers. Tonight we have Lujaya Tony, the Minister for Community Development, joining us on Resource PNG. Honorable Lujaya Tony, thank you for joining us on Resource PNG.
Thank you, Martin. It's indeed an honor to be here.
Thanks. Now, Minister, the resource boom that the country has had over the past 10 years has been viewed as not being very socially inclusive or environmentally sustainable. What are your views as Minister for Community Development on the resource boom that the country has recently experienced?
Well, first and foremost, in consideration of the fact that we've had a number of development projects in this country in relation to mining, petroleum exploration, and your statement that they haven't been very socially inclusive, and also in light of community development activities, there's still that gap to some extent. Reason being is that the National Content Development Plan or the content development plan of the companies concerned have been very much focused on the development partners' agenda. It's only now that we're beginning to voice that lack of social inclusion. It's only now that we're beginning to realize, and I say we meaning government and other stakeholders that want in on these developments, we're starting to realize that that we can, if given the opportunity, assist our development partners to close that gap and participate together, working in those areas of dire need at this time, and that's the social sector, community at large.
Now, you mentioned the National Content Plan. For our viewers out there, the National Content Plan is the document that a developer brings to government and to communities, highlighting to them the human resource development aspects of the development, the social aspects, and the workforce development aspects. Now, one of the criticisms is that perhaps government is not actively involved in creating the National Content Plan. What role do you think your department, the Community Development Department, can play in ensuring that the content plan is relevant to stakeholders?
There is a development plan that all project developers put on the table for government consideration, and we just haven't, we meaning governments, respective governments up to date, just haven't seen the importance or the need to, at that time, discuss and broker other arrangements within that content development plan that was placed by the developer. And perhaps because of the shortness of timing and the need to get on with the project, we have allowed projects to go ahead with the accepting the content development plan that has been put forward by the developer, and we've gone ahead and developed Mishima and Octedi and so on and so forth. And only now we've begun to realize where we have lost out on the equity arrangements and you know, environmental and community obligations, the entire fabric of social, we have missed out big time. A lot of, and I must admit, a lot of money has left our shores in favor of the developer.
Now, in terms of the overarching framework that could possibly be in place, the government currently doesn't have a policy or legislative response to the developers' national content plan, i.e. the government doesn't have a template. What are your thoughts about that?
My department at the moment is taking on the agenda of the EID registration process through civil registry, and we're housing that under my department. I think it only makes sense that my department's technical team are working on a template that we'd like to work across an interdepartment, interagency arrangement where we all get our technical officers from the respective departments that want to participate, create the template through my department, and have it available for debate, for consultation, whatever, and acceptance by government, and we must move now with it. And I believe we should also push for a review of our existing development arrangements and then factor this national content development template out of my department into these various projects. That's the line I'm pushing now.
No, a lot of our viewers would like to also know when you talk about the national content plan and the template, what does Minister Tony envisage? What's her vision for Papua New Guinea in terms of creating the standards that need to be followed?
Well, my vision is this: unless and until and when we get all our relevant stakeholders participating and having input into this national content plan, we will then be developing this attitude of guardianship, attitude of ownership. We want to see that, whatever the arrangements that we come up with, it does go all the way down to community. We all take responsibility of watching this project unfold, knowing exactly who our participants and what the outcomes will be, and that is something that is lacking. We've had so many other developments for the last 38 years up until now, and who's watching over it? Who's being a guardian of that development, and who knows exactly what we're going to get out of it and where we want to go with it? And until and unless you actually involve, a wider participation and actually have it as an accord, an agreement, a national plan, whatever you want to call it, we all won't feel a level of ownership and participation in this. And I think that's very important. It must happen.
How would you like to see the national content plan integrated into, say, the Vision 2050, Vision 2020, the medium-term development strategies, the Millennium Development Goals? What do you envisage instead of the pillars of development?
Let's put it this way, Martin. All these wonderful dreams and visions and whatnot, the heart of the matter is the national content plan. And unless you put the heart, which is the national content plan, in the center of the vision and the strategy, we still have a very, very big gap there, and the disparity is still there, and we'll be still wondering, what is it that we need? And we've got all the strategy in place, we've got the framework there with the vision and all that, but let's now put the heart of the matter where it's supposed to go, and it'll drive.
More with Minister Lajaya Tony after the break. In this segment, we talk about how the Department of Community Development can play a role in reverse social mapping, whereby communities are provided a platform to fully and better understand the role resource developers play in their communities. We also discussed the role institutions like the IBBM Enterprise Centre play in building capacities of local landowners to actively participate in the development of the social economy. We also talk about the role of the government in converting non-renewable resource wealth into tangible, long-term, sustainable development.
And you and I obviously have an understanding of these issues, but for a lot of our rural people, they do not have that level of understanding. And when, say, companies go in, they do social mapping, i.e. they try to understand local communities, but then the question arises, do the communities understand the companies? Do they understand the changes that are going to come? What role do you think your department can play in facilitating this, if you like, reverse social mapping?
That is a very, very important consideration, Martin, and I thank you for asking that, because we have, for example, from the University of Technology, we have graduates who are working with the project developers at this moment, they're actually doing the social mapping and that kind of thing. So what needs to be done is, while we have prospecting licenses given out and the prospectors there, and they say, well, it'll take X number of years before we actually start the first project or whatever, our people, community development officers and graduates out of the University of Technology who are there that can assist in the areas of social mapping should go down, be on the ground, several years prior to the project actually happening. Because they're the ones that are going to map it out and say, okay, this is the entire scope of the population. They're going to have to move to a new location. And it's going to take this, so therefore the infrastructure's got to run through like that on the new location. We've got to leave X amount of hectares for the project. And all these considerations have got to be done prior to the project actually arriving on the ground and digging up the hole and doing whatever. Right now, for the last 38 years, we've actually got environmental refugees. People just sort of like, all of a sudden the big machines arrive and people are being told, okay, you've got to get up and move. And where they're moving to doesn't have infrastructure, road considerations and other things.
And I suppose what you've highlighted essentially it explains the litany of so-called landowner issues or social problems that are associated with resource development. And how do we handle that as a government?
Well, again, the whole time frame, when you begin to discuss and allow for, okay, it's going to take X number of years to have the developer come and develop the mine now, and then before, again, you bring them on site with all their machinery and all that, we've got to also calculate how long is it going to take to do our social mapping exercise, to move the people to a new land area, get the infrastructure up for them. All these considerations, pre and post, have got to be mapped out.
We've talked about social aspects, but one of the important aspects for communities is also economic development and for local communities to be able to participate.
Absolutely.
You've recently highlighted your vision in seeing the Institute of Business and Banking Management building capacity of Papua New Guineans to be participating in the economic development of the country. Where do you see the role of institutions like IBBM in building capacity for local landowners who are involved in resource projects?
Oh, they play a very strategic role, and especially now initially when we talked about who are the stakeholders that come in, IBBM is one that will be able to, as part of social mapping is one exercise, then part of being able to identify the potential of that population. You go in and you see, okay, how many of them are already engaged in SMEs, this and that, and the other, how many from zilch? So how do we organize them, and what areas do we go into them, and that kind of thing. So again, pre and post planning. And that this is where I see IBBM is able to provide that information for the benefit of the developer and for government as well. So, while the developer fulfills its obligations, let's say, for example, what can the government provide for the developer? Okay, so we state it out. What do we expect the developer to do apart from paying taxes? It's community obligations. And one of the community obligations factored into part sharing the cost, counterpart funding by the developer and government would be IBBM.
You've talked about MISIMA, you've talked about pre and post planning, and one of the things, recognitions of the resources sector is that a lot of these resources are non-renewable. And then there is the challenge of ensuring sustainable development. We see MISIMA as a classic example of where development is unsustainable. What role do you think the government can play in ensuring that when all the resources are exhausted, there is still something there on the ground for communities?
Well, let's look at this partnership between the government and the developer, and what is stipulated to be achieved by the developer, apart from paying taxes, their community obligation to the landowners. Now, apart from infrastructure and making sure that there is a satellite township, They can also look at agriculture and livestock, supporting that. Also, the government, when they do collect the taxes from the mine or whatever developers have operated in this country, where do they park the wealth that is obtained? You know, the government's percentage as opposed to provincial government and the landowner's percentage. Can that be channeled into ensuring that the renewable sector, agriculture, livestock, and those things are supported, apart from some of that money going into the Sovereign Wealth Fund? So again, it's a matter of discussing and agreeing which component the developer will take up as opposed to what we will take up, and upping the equity arrangement as well. Is it going to be 70-30? You know, those considerations, so that we're able to support our SME sector as well.
You mentioned SMEs, and obviously this is a fantastic time in PNG's history where Papua New Guineans are becoming very affirmative.
Absolutely.
And just reflecting on the Constitution of Papua New Guinea and the national goals and directive principles, where do you think your department, where does it get its constitutional mandate from in terms of empowering our people to participate in the development of their country, and particularly the resource sector?
Well, what is enshrined in the Constitution has been wonderfully broken up to become, you know, various aspects of it are mandates to the various departments. And the fact that I am responsible for the Department or Ministry of Community Development, it goes all the way down, you know, government thinking, government priority. How does that translate all the way down into ward level, affecting the lives of people? And that's where my department is responsible for actually mapping it out. Not only talking about it at policy and legislative level, but mapping it out, outsourcing to our service providers, having our community components, community development officers at the district level, our technical team right down there to make it happen with our development partners.
And one of the things, I suppose, just the final question, is that development costs money. Absolutely. And a lot of businesses wish to cut costs. Mm-hmm. And for them, when they reflect on, say, a national content plan, they would obviously be concerned about costs. Mm. How do we create a policy framework, a legislative framework that does not increase the cost on business, and in doing so make Papua New Guinea less competitive globally as an investment destination?
That's an interesting one. I think it was several weeks ago, and even yesterday, had the opportunity to read a book written by one of our own Papua New Guinea writers, Tiri Kumbakwil, or something to that effect. I hope I'm saying his name right. And looking at we need to take a stock take of what our assets are. And looking at our biggest asset is the human resource of this country. How can we turn our people around so that they don't become liabilities, but they become assets, marketable assets in themselves, and they're able to contribute a certain amount of support, sweat equity into some of these development projects at ground zero. So my interest as Minister for Community Development is to look at ground zero and tap in, create a change or turnaround of mindset, and start from zilch at zero level to build up the understanding and the desire to participate as an asset that can make the money at ground zero and get the support after we've done the sweat equity, that kind of thing, get the support from the government and from the developer. So that there's a sense of ownership, and it's not like waiting for a free handout from either the developer or government.
Minister Lujaya Tony, thank you for joining us on Resource PNG.
You're welcome, Martin.
Asian Development Bank, that's next. Stay tuned. With the current commodities downturn, we've seen the impact on the country's budget. We now talk to Aaron Batten, the Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank, ADB, to get his opinion on PNG's current economic position.
Good evening, viewers. Joining me tonight on Resource PNG is Aaron Button, the country economist for the Asian Development Bank. Aaron Button, thank you for joining us on Resource PNG.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Aaron, Papua New Guinea is heavily dependent on its extractive industries. With the current commodities downturn, we've seen the impact that has had on the country's budget. It's increased the deficit by, I think, 100 million kina. The ADB has talked about diversifying the economy. The president recently mentioned that. What is your opinion about this situation that the country is in?
Well, certainly the downturn in international commodity prices for many of PNG's key export products, combined with this natural winding down of LNG project construction, has increased a number of pressures on the PNG economy. And as you mentioned, some of the fiscal revenues this year will be slightly lower than what was originally expected. But ADB still maintains a very positive outlook for the PNG economy over the medium term in particular. Our growth forecast for this year is about 5.5%. So while that's still about half of what it was last year, that's still moderately high by international and by PNG's own historical standards. Having said that, with this new sort of tighter fiscal and global situation, it will be important for the PNG economy to adjust and adapt to the changing external environment, and that might include things such as winding back some of the high rates of expenditure growth we've seen in recent years, and then over the longer term trying to address some of the more structural constraints to the economic growth in their country, such as service delivery and improving competition in the economy.
Now, you've highlighted the expenditure growth. The country has been borrowing a lot to fund that fiscal expansion by the government. In terms of looking at the impact that would have on, say, sovereign wealth fund revenues in the future, what is your position on that, or what view do you have on the impact this such high level of debt might have on sovereign wealth fund, money going into the sovereign wealth fund?
Well, I think firstly it's important to highlight that over the last decade the government has done a very good job of bringing down its total public debt figures. It reached a peak back in the early 2000s which approached up to 80% of GDP. Now that last year was brought down to about 27% of GDP, which the IMF has said is low risk of debt sustainability issues and is quite a reasonable level for the PNG government to maintain over the medium term. Having said that, as you mentioned, with the increased spending this year, that debt will increase. I think the expectation is up to about 35% of GDP, which will raise some risk for the government. But so long as they can rein in the expenditure growth, then I don't think that we should see any adverse macroeconomic effects from that short-term borrowing. You
were one of the economists who wrote earlier on about the impact of the slowdown of construction of the LNG project and the impact that would have on workers who are leaving. The government was thinking along those lines in terms of expanding its fiscal expenditure on construction projects and getting the workers from the LNG surplus workers who get laid off to get into those construction activities. Now we've seen that the LNG construction is actually delayed by an year. Did the government jump too early on that?
Well, certainly the increase in spending this year will help with the expected slowdown that was going to happen. I think the central bank has forecast that it could add up to about 2% of GDP growth for this year. So the fiscal expansion was well timed. The bigger question surrounding that expenditure is how well the money is spent, and as you've said previously too, with the shift to large-scale national infrastructure, it's important that the appropriate preparations are made for that expenditure that is being undertaken, and this is work that ADB is very actively involved in, and that includes doing the necessary feasibility studies, the preparatory studies, and then as projects are implemented, making sure that they have proper monitoring and evaluation and oversight. And so it's through that process that we can make sure that even though the government is spending additional money, that it can be spent well and that it can be a worthwhile investment for the country.
The sovereign wealth fund is not something that's perhaps very new to Papua New Guinea. We had a form of it with the mineral stabilization fund, and you've highlighted in some of the work you've written the political difficulties in maintaining such large amount of funds when it is in the political interest to spend it. Looking at the sovereign wealth fund, and what sort of mechanisms do you think should be incorporated into legislation or policy frameworks of the sovereign wealth fund that could prevent such political spending and so allow for the sovereign wealth fund to work as it's supposed to be working.
Well, I think PNG's own history, as well as the experiences of a large number of countries around the world, can teach us a lot about how to design sovereign wealth funds so that they can really help to overcome many of the challenges that a heavy dependence on resources create. And that includes things such as the higher exchange rate, which can tend to crowd out other sectors of the economy, as well as also the ability of these sectors to soak up scarce labour. I think there's really three main elements to a sovereign wealth fund that we'd like to see, and that international experience has sort of shown are the key design features for them. The first of them is very strong governance and accountability frameworks around the funds. So there needs to be a high level of transparency of fund usage. We need to know what's going into the fund and what's coming out. And there also needs to be very strict drawdown rules. So in any 1 year, it's very clear what the maximum amount that can come out of that fund is. The second key element of sovereign wealth funds tends to be that they're fully integrated into the national budget process. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it ensures that the spending that's being made is coordinated with all other government spending so that you can balance the priorities of the nation in a coherent way. And secondly, it also allows the National Parliament to exercise its full authority and accountability over the people that are spending the money and what those funds are being used for. So integrating into the budget can have a very big impact. The third sort of key design element of sovereign wealth funds around the globe has been that the savings that are accumulated in those sovereign wealth funds are held in offshore denominated assets, so typically might be US dollar assets. Now they can certainly be managed by Papua New Guineans and managed locally, but it's important to have the assets held in foreign currency because that prevents the negative impacts of what we mentioned before about the higher exchange rate, and it also means that the funds can be held in an accountable, sustainable way.
In fact, the impact of the exchange rate has been, a lot of resource projects import a lot of the stuff they need, supplies, and the impact that has on them is quite negative as well. So it's not just other sectors of the economy that impacted by a higher exchange rate. Even the resource sector itself gets impacted because they need the supplies. But just looking at, say, the sovereign wealth fund, let's concentrate on that again. It's going to be funding a lot of infrastructure projects. We're also seeing recently moves by companies to use tax credit schemes to fund infrastructure. We're seeing, for example, the redevelopment of the Pineapple building in Waigani by a oil search tax credit scheme. You talked about the need for privatization to improve efficiencies in the economy. What role do you think resource companies have to play in terms of using tax credit schemes to implement government projects?
Well, I think certainly, a lot is made of the challenges that resource companies create for the PNG economy as a whole and for creating diversified economic growth. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of positive spillovers that come out of the resource sector in PNG. I think the LNG project in particular has trained thousands of Papua New Guineans in important trade skills and construction skills, which have become a huge resource for the country now as that phase winds down. As you mentioned, these businesses can also play an important role in building up the infrastructure of the economy. And then also they can play a direct role in service delivery, and I think this is where the tax credit scheme comes into it. They can be engaged by the government to add some capacity to the infrastructure construction, but they also, in many rural and remote parts of the country, are directly providing health and education around project impact sites. So I think having a coherent process around how resource companies are engaged in that process could be a very positive way to go forward for the PNG government.
We'll continue this interview after the break. Welcome back. We continue the interview with Aaron Batten and find out about ADB's reform opportunities to encourage more diversified economic growth in PNG.
To Octeri, which is something that is of interest to everybody, and I'm not sure if you have your views about it, because we're seeing essentially the nationalization of an asset, a mining asset, and the spillover effects. We do not know what it's going to have, and these assets located in a very remote part of the country where a lot of communities need services that are provided by the company. In terms of the management of not private sector, but management of companies, and you've talked about in terms of the state-owned entities, what sort of impact do you think the government takeover of Octedi might have in terms of management of the company?
Well, I certainly think the Octedi case is a very unique one, and it's a difficult challenge, and I think it's probably a question for the government and people of PNG as they balance the important environmental and social considerations around that. But your broader point about state-owned enterprises and their performance and how we can improve their performance is a very important question, and something that ADB is very actively involved in discussing with the government and trying to provide them with assistance. And the report that you mentioned, the Finding Balance report that ADB produced last year, I think really highlighted a lot of the disappointing results that state-owned enterprises have produced since independence, and it showed that they've soaked up a lot of scarce capital in the economy, and they've produced relatively poor service delivery outcomes as a result. Now, it also highlighted, though, that there's a lot of things that we can do to improve their performance, and firstly around that is allowing them to operate on a more commercial basis. Many of these SOEs are hamstrung really because they're required to deliver a range of services, some of which are commercial, some of which are not commercial, and it requires them to cross-subsidise, and it creates very distorted incentives for the management, and it makes it very difficult to operate them in an efficient way. So working towards a system where you can identify how to separate out those different activities is very important. I think also the last decade has shown that the introduction of competition into a lot of these sectors, like for example with telecommunications when Digicel came in, can have tremendous benefits for the quality of service delivery and the efficiency of the sectors. So I think ADB is very active in trying to pursue those types of reform opportunities and trying to encourage more diversified economic growth across the economy.
And in terms of the diversification, there's some reports coming out. For example, recently the IMF did a seminar presentation at the National Institute of National Affairs, and one of the comments that was made was that even though the stats show some sort of diversification happening, it's actually all linked to services that are linked to the mining and petroleum sectors. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to say the last decade has been really quite transformational for the PNG economy. We've had 11, 12 years straight of economic growth now, but more importantly, that growth has been very diversified. It's actually been operating outside of the mining sector. It's been across a wide range of activities. And as a result of that diversified economic growth, the size of the private sector and the formal private sector job opportunities for Papua New Guineans has almost doubled across that time. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 250 and 350,000 Papua New Guineans are now expected to be in the private sector formal workforce. Now, certainly since 2009, a lot of that growth in sectors such as construction and transport has certainly been driven by the LNG project and its spillovers. But I think the genesis of that diversified economic growth really came much before that, right back in the early 2000s when some really important structural reforms were undertaken in the economy. I think at the outset that included the independence of the central bank and it having a very clear mandate for price stability. So that has allowed the macroeconomic stability that we've seen in the economy over the last decade to really underpin economic growth, which wasn't there previously. We also saw very important reforms in the financial services sector. We saw the privatisation of PNG Banking Corporation and the emergence of BSP, which itself has become a major employer across the country and a major service provider. We also saw a reforming of the superannuation companies, and they themselves now, as they've become more commercial, have become a major source of investment across the economy. So those financial sector reforms have been very important to the diversified economic growth. Further into the decade, we saw the telecommunications reform and the entrance of Digicel and the massive economic growth and employment creation from that reform. So whilst I certainly think the spillovers from LNG and a number of other projects have been important, it hasn't been the only thing that has driven that diversified growth. And in fact, it's been those structural reforms which have really led to that outcome.
And in fact, the report goes on to say that by 2017, the LNG revenues, even though they'll be large, would only be replacing the revenues from those resource sites that are the resource depleted, and then we'll also see the greater importance of the non-mineral sector. Is that also ADB's views about where Papua New Guinea's growth prospects are into the future?
Certainly, I think in terms of employment creation, it's growth, it's the economic growth that happens outside of the mineral sector that can be the most important, and that's certainly been the experience in a lot of other Asia-Pacific economies that are heavily dependent on resources. Services sectors, for example, which has been some recent studies done by ADB on, show that they're the most labour-intensive parts of the economy. So when you encourage growth there, you get much higher growth in private sector employment. The key task is using those resource revenues well so that they can encourage that growth in other sectors of the economy. And that comes back to using them to enhance national infrastructure and to build up the skills and education of the local people.
In fact, if we're looking at this growth path, it seems that Papua New Guinea is sort of on I reckon a right trajectory in terms of its growth prospects with the importance of the non-mineral sector. Some people actually say that when the LNG project's over, we'll have no gas and no economy. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
No, I don't think it's a fair assessment, actually. I think the LNG projects provides PNG with a huge opportunity to invest in the other sectors of the economy. PNG has certainly benefited a lot from its resource projects, but it still actually has very low government revenue per capita. It's amongst one of the lowest in the South Pacific. So there is a much higher need for mobilising additional finance for the country. That can come from resource revenues, it can also come from the private sector and also from the development partners. And I think together, all those different sources of finance can lead to what is very sustainable growth in their country. It has huge natural resources. Agriculture is a very underutilised sector, as well as plentiful sea resources as well. So the opportunities in the economy are enormous over the next decade.
Aaron Button, thank you for joining us on Resource PNG.
Thank you for having me.
We'll have more when we come back. Thanks for staying with us. We now talk to Bill Muntz of NKW Holdings. We find out the origins of the landowner company and how it is attached to the Hidden Valley mine development.
Good evening, viewers. Joining me tonight on Resource PNG is Bill Muntz from the landowner company NKW Holdings. Bill Muntz, thank you for joining us on Resource PNG.
Thank you, Martin.
Could you just inform our viewers about what the letters NKW stand for and the origins of the company?
Yeah, sure, Martin. NKW is the landowner company attached to the Hidden Valley mine development. It was established 7 years ago when the mine was in its infancy and being built. It's a joint venture company, if you like, owned by three distinct tribal groups. One group is in Watu, they're the Nautis. The other two groups are up at Wau, they're the Biangai. That's the Quembu and the Winema. And that's where the NKW came from. It's the three groups that are joined together. They each own a third of the company, and as such they've established investment companies to distribute the dividends, etc., that we produce out of NKW.
So in terms of the company's core business, what sort of activities is the company engaged in?
Basically, the concept of NKW was that the NKW was to take the larger contracts out of the mine, tender for it, mind you, it is a commercial venture. The idea was to take the larger contracts such as the fuel cartage, the catering, plant hire, and develop those up, because they're all very very big money earners, so that we could get an even distribution back to the shareholders of those larger contracts. Smaller contracts such as landscaping, janitorial, stuff like that, was to go to the landowners with the assistance of NKW management to involve the landowners in the development. So
obviously with these businesses, what sort of impact has it had in terms of growth of the business in the past 7 years?
It's actually been very, very good. I'm very surprised. I'm very surprised at what's happened with the company. The government assisted the company with some seed capital at the beginning, and myself and my staff have been able to double the value of the company each year for the last 6 years. So the company now is worth a considerable amount of money.
Now, you've received government assistance in terms of seed capital. Were there also tax concessions such as those that are given to other resource projects around the country?
Unfortunately, Martin, no. And this I didn't realise, that the government gave me $1 million kina, 500,000 from the provincial government and 500,000 from the national government. This was paid to me over a period of 2 years in 100,000 here, 50,000 there, until they eventually paid the whole lot. Then when I lodged my first tax return, my accountant said I had to declare that $1 million kina as income, and the government taxed me 30% on it.
Now, in terms of the growth of the business, as you highlighted, you've doubled the growth of the business each year. Now, what sort of experiences, lessons can be learned from NKW? Because there's a history in this country of landowner companies going broke due to mismanagement. Have you faced similar issues in NKW?
I haven't actually faced those issues in NKW, but maybe Martin, I should tell you a little bit about my experience.
Sure. Go on.
I started with the mining industry in Porgera. I was called in there when IPI was having difficulties with their setup. I came in and assisted the then general manager get IPI back on the road again. So I learned a fair bit out of that. And it was the experience that I got there really helped me in what I've done now. 7 years ago, Harmony, who were the operators, rang me up. I was on Missima. They rang me and said, "Would you like to start the landowner company?" And I said, "Well, yep. I've had the experience. I've seen what's happened in IPI. I've heard about the Lakaka or the Lahir landowner company, and I understand what areas went wrong, and I feel that I can, with that experience, I can set up a company that will be a lasting company for the benefit of the landowners."
So you've had these experiences. Could you identify some of those weaknesses that exist or that have existed that have caused the demise of some of these landowner companies?
Yes, I think I hesitate to use the word mismanagement. I think what it is, it's a matter of the management taking their eye off the ball, actually taking their eye off the development. Certainly with IPI, IPI sort of suddenly got away from the manager, and he took his eye off the ball, and suddenly they were in the middle of developing the Kyrick airstrip. There was a lot of activity going on, and unfortunately the then general manager sort of took his eye off the ball, and it only took 2 or 3 months and they had problems.
Now, you've obviously learned those lessons and you've tried to avoid them with NKW. In terms of the development of the workforce, have you tried to train people to try and guide the business in such a way that you avoid those traps?
Yes, Martin, I have, to the extent, with my experience up here, I've been able to identify people that are good managers, are people that are able to benefit the company, and I've employed those people to help me develop the NKW profile.
So obviously there has to be some sort of community relations role within NKW as well in terms of managing expectations of landowners. How do you manage those expectations?
Martin, with difficulty. Particularly because, as I said, there are three different groups, two basically different language groups, I guess, the Watuts and the Biangai, and I've had a lot of assistance from the Landowner Association. The Landowner Association, early in the piece, I talked to the Landowner Association and said, right, the association takes care of the political side of the development. I will take care of the commercial side. Experience tells me that you mix politics with commerce, you've got a problem.
More of this interview when we come back. Thanks for staying with us. We continue the interview with Bill Muntz of NKW Holdings.
Now, the two big shareholders of the MMJV project, Newcrest and Harmony Gold, are facing some difficulties at the moment. How has that impacted business in terms of the contracts, the cash flow to the company?
Martin, about 2 months ago, the joint venture, Newcrest Harmony, called us in, called all the contractors in to see what they could do about reducing the cost of production of gold, and that was all about the gold price where it was. The cost of production was too high, so we all chipped in and we all effectively took between a 20 and 25% reduction in our contracts. So to answer your question, yes, it certainly has affected NKW to the extent of about 20% of our income.
I suppose that highlights the risk of the boom and bust nature of the commodities cycles that exist, and in terms of diversifying your business and not being too dependent on the mine, what sort of activities or business plans do you have to try and avoid the risks that are involved?
Martin, I identified this probably 2 years ago. In my business plan, I saw the pitfalls of being a one-client company. The mine has been good to me. The mine has allowed me to get working capital and develop the company to where it is now. My business plan states that by the year 2015, I would like 50% of my income to be non-mine related, or in other words, I want to progress the NKW Group out of a one-client company.
It just slipped my head, but in terms of the contracts that you highlighted, there are these major logistics contracts, and then there's the minor contracts of landscaping and stuff. When you were developing the company, there obviously needs to be some sort of capital expenditure for equipment and stuff to be able to bid for those contracts competitively. How were you able to successfully gain those contracts, win those contracts from the company?
Martin, I was very lucky. I was very lucky because I've been in the country, I've been in Papua New Guinea since 1978. I have got a lot of contacts here, and when I went to start NKW off, I knew I didn't have enough working capital, so I went to people that either knew me or knew of me, and we formed joint ventures. Those joint ventures basically gave me the ability to develop up contracts within the company, within NKW, and become commercial, and give, I believe, give the mine a commercial result for their freight, for their catering, for the plant hire.
And so there is this criticism, I suppose, amongst academics and people generally, that resource projects tend to be enclaves of wealth. The challenge, therefore, is to spread that wealth, and that's the challenge that everyone in PNG faces. From the perspective of your landowner company, and what sort of thinking is there around local landowners in terms of spreading the benefits to communities that are in the impact corridor of the mining operations?
Let me go back, Martin, to the MOA, or the agreement, the mining agreement that was signed. The people, the then bureaucrats in the Morribee provincial government and the landowner group had a lot of forward thinking. They distributed the royalties, and this was the first time this had been done, to my knowledge, in Papua New Guinea. They actually distributed the royalties back through the local level government, so it wasn't necessarily in the mine impact area. It was sort of right through down to Lae, to the provincial capital. So the royalties were distributed. The business, all landowners on every development are fiercely jealous of their landowner company and the business accruing from that. Under all the agreements, the landowners have got a preference clause. So it's a little bit difficult to spread that. It's a little bit difficult, but the only thing that we can do is run business courses, where people can come along and be trained, identified, and assisted in a way that doesn't impinge on the distribution of contracts back to the landowner company or landowners.
I also hear you're getting into the four-wheel drive business as well as water bottling. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, Martin, somebody's been telling stories on me. Probably 12 months ago, the mine had a problem with the rivers that flooded on the way between Lae and the mine, and we were looking for some sort of solution for that. And we came across a four-wheel drive bus called a Brahman. It's distributed out of Australia. I looked at it and I thought to myself, this is a goer. This is a good vehicle for the mining industry. So NKW got the PNG distributing rights for the bus. We have 4 of them in Lae, and they're working on the run between Lae and Hidden Valley. They're a 28-seater bus, 4-wheel drive. They're high set, so they can go through the flooded rivers, and I believe they are a very good alternate to what we're running at the moment. We're running Roses and coasters up and down the highway, and while they're good and they're serving their purpose, they're not purpose built. So this is part and parcel of my diversification on sort of with the direction of the company. Later on, so about 12 months ago now, the opportunity came up to buy 50% of a water bottling company that was established here in Port Moresby. I was approached. I did a due diligence on the company, and it really fitted in with my development plans. We were building a new building. They were going to expand into Lae. We were building the building, so we built a purpose-built water bottling factory in our building, and that should be opening probably the end of next month. So we'll be distributing water direct out of our building in Lae next month.
Bill Mans, thank you for joining us on Resource PNG.
Martin, it's been a pleasure, and I really do think that this sort of story, there are lots of stories out there to be told, and Resource PNG is doing their bit for it, and I do thank you for having me on.
That ends another edition of Resource PNG. If you have any comments or queries, do email us on this address, resourcepng@mtv.com.pg. Or to find out more, check MTV online. That's www.mtv.com.pg, and go to our Resource PNG page. Or you can check our page on Facebook. Thanks for your company. Bye for now.